Thank you, Ms. Oristano-James, and good evening, everyone. So we have an update tonight on our budget development process for the 2021-2022 school year. Ms. Failla and I will be sharing with you an update. I just want to share my screen with everyone. I hope all of you can see that.
We can see it. We're good.
So tonight, Ms. Failla and I will be presenting on just an overview of the executive budget proposal that was put out by Governor Andrew Cuomo a couple of weeks ago, an analysis of his aid proposal for the Monticello Central School District for the 21-22 school year. And Ms. Failla will be sharing details on what a rollover budget would look like for 21-22. So when we talk about a rollover budget, that is basically taking all of the programs from this current year and just rolling them over into next year. So just to kind of ground us in our process in developing this budget, and it really comes back to what the vision is that the board has established for this district, and ultimately that's becoming a district of choice. And in becoming a district of choice, we have to keep in mind all of these elements that go into that process. And one can start anywhere on this circle, and some of you have seen this before, but I tend to like to start up in the top right of it, which is we hope to increase revenues that improve our schools, but also at the same time minimize the tax burden of our residents. We want to improve the quality of schools so that this becomes an attractive district for new homeowners. And we also want the tax burden to be reasonable that also attracts new businesses, which also brings in hopefully new workers and employees, and they buy homes here. So by having improved schools and a reasonable tax burden, we then therefore attract new businesses and homeowners, which then increases the tax base through responsible development. We increase the value of properties and also the taxable base of the district at the same time. So these all operate in concert, and we have to be mindful of all these different parts as we assemble our budget. Just a brief recap on how our revenues came to us this current school year. You'll recall that the public approved our budget proposal of $90.5 million on July 28th. And at that time, we had projected our revenues for this year to be approximately $44.5 million in tax levy. In other words, those are the taxes we collect from the community. About $6.1 million in other revenues. Those are interest payments and other types of payments that we collect throughout the year. $37.3 million in anticipated state aid. That number fluctuates ever so slightly throughout the year based on different expenses that the district generates throughout its operations. And then last spring, the board elected to apply $2.7 million of its fund balance to help offset the tax levy. So the district has an existing fund balance, and the Board of Education elects to use some of that to help keep taxes at a reasonable level. So the governor issued his budget proposal on a little bit after, I think around January 16th. That's consistent with what the governor is required to do under state law. Now, on paper, it appears that Monticello Central School District, along with other school districts across the state, will see a state aid increase of about 7%. And in our case, that's almost $3 million. Now, that seems good on the surface. However, when we peel the layers of the onion back and we really look at what the governor is calling aid for the upcoming school year, we notice it has a different flavor than what it has in years past. First and foremost, the governor has included STAR reimbursements. This is the reimbursements that the state pays to school districts from taxpayers who receive the STAR property tax reduction. Previously, that was never included in the state aid calculation. However, this year, the governor has cited what the state paid the district last year in a STAR reimbursement, which it's required to do by law. And that was approximately $1.9 million. For the upcoming school year, they estimate the STAR reimbursement to be about $1.9 million again, a little bit less though. However, they're also inflicting something they're calling the local district funding adjustment. So not only will they include that STAR reimbursement as part of the aid package, they're going to withhold it. So whenever you see the term adjustment in a state aid run, that's the state's way of saying you're not really getting that money. The governor's proposal also includes one-time disbursements of federal aid, $1.7 million in CARES Act funding that should have been funded this current year and has yet to be approved. They're including that in our aid calculation. And they're also including new money, which is $5.1 million in the federal stimulus bill that was signed into law in December of 2020. Both of those are one-time payments. I'll come back to the problem with that shortly. The governor has also proposed to freeze our foundation aid. This year, that was $26.5 million. That is unchanged. Typically, that increases from year to year as our expenses go up as well. And the governor is also proposing to collapse expense-driven aids into a catch-all services aid category. And what he's proposing there is that things like transportation aid, BOCES aid, high tax aid, things that are generated by the unique expenses and qualities of the Monticello Central School District, the governor hopes to collapse into one large category and just give it a lump sum payment. So what the governor is proposing that number to be for 21-22 is $7.7 million. But if we were to use the current law formula, that would be about $8.1 million that should be coming to the district. So that's a difference of about $387,000. Overall, when we compare this kind of shell game, it is a net loss of state aid for the district of about $452,740. So where am I taking those estimates from? The New York State Council of School Superintendents did a pretty thorough analysis of our state aid runs. So what one sees in these reports is, the current year estimates and what the governor's proposal is, that's seen as 21-22, and the net difference. So I've highlighted the STAR, the inclusion, and then the withdrawal of the STAR. You'll see that here, this local district funding adjustment. You'll see the CARES Act funding, which should be paid this current year and it won't be added next year. And then the $5.1 million of federal stimulus relief. And there you see the net loss when you take away the STAR to be about $452,000. Here's the services aid estimates. Again, the $8.1 million that we would receive under the current law as compared to the governor's proposal of $7.7 million. So the governor's office would say, hey, you're still getting an additional $359,000. But in the long run, this will be very problematic for the district and school districts across the state. The big danger in the governor's proposal is that it produces a funding cliff. And what is a funding cliff? A funding cliff is basically a one-time disbursement that would happen, in this case, the 21-22 school year. However, that will not carry into the 22-23 school year. So that's a total of about $6.8 million that we would receive next year in this one-time CARES Act and COVID-19 stimulus relief check, but it would not be carried through in 22-23. So the critical questions become, how do we prepare for the anticipated loss in this year's budget? So think the STAR reimbursement that gets withheld. And then budgets to come when we talk about this $6.8 million funding cliff. So Ms. Failla, I'm going to turn this over to Ms. Failla, who's going to talk about the rollover budget next, and also what this funding cliff could look like 2, 3, 4 years down the road, and it's not good. So Ms. Failla?
Okay, so when we do a rollover budget, there's certain things that we take into consideration. The health insurance premiums for the year 2021. We know that the individual plan increased 4.2% and the family premium increased 2.7%. So for July through December, we use those rates, and then we estimate the remaining 6 months of the school year. We also take into consideration the retirement system contributions. Those rates have been relatively flat. Just recently, the teachers' retirement system estimated 9.8%, which is up a little bit from their 9.3 from the previous year. So it's not significant. So I estimated in the rollover 10%. So I was pretty close to the 9.8. We also look at the collective bargaining agreements and for all of the units and the step and percentage increases for those. And we make some assumptions for ones that are still in negotiation. We use existing and new debt service payments from our debt service schedule. So we know what those payments are going out several years. And when I did all of that and I came up with the first draft rollover budget, the estimated rollover budget was $92,186,000, or an increase of 1.83%. I also took the breakage from retirements and reduced the salaries by that amount. I forgot to say that. Next slide. So the other thing we have to look at when we're talking about a rollover is if the district can generate enough revenue to support the budget. So the rollover budget kind of gives us an idea of where we're going, and 1.83% is like a pleasant surprise. It was, low, and that's great. I've had years where our rollovers were about 5%. So that was a nice number, actually very workable. In order to determine the revenue side, we have, the governor's proposal that Dr. Evans talked about, and the other major part is the tax cap. And there's this huge calculation that, we have to go through to determine how much we can levy. And a couple of the factors are the tax-based growth factor, which is up from last year's or this current year's tax-based growth factor. And then there's the allowable levy growth factor. That's actually down. Tax-based growth factor is the one that gets applied to the previous year's levy. And then the growth factor, you'll see it in the next slide. But anyway, so then the discussion about the tax cap calculation, there's also debt service and pilot adjustments. And when you factor those in, our tax cap for the 21-22 school year may actually, and I'll show it to you in the next slide, is actually in excess of the 2% cap. But we may not need to go all the way to the cap. And the next slide will show you what happens if we don't. And then, of course, the fund balance, and we need to consider the long-term effects of this one-time influx of federal aid that the state is now claiming as state aid. And if that's not, put back into future years, there's we have to figure out how we're going to fund budgets with that loss of revenue. Next slide. So this one's a little hard to see, but this is the tax cap calculator. The first column is the current year, the 2021 budget. You start with the previous year's levy, and then it flows forward. So the 1920 levy was 44 million. You go down a couple lines, you'll see that tax-based growth factor at 1.0035 for the current year. And then the next column over is the 1.0098. So that's where that increase is for the following year. We then have the pilots from the previous year, and those flow through. That number will be refined a little bit. That's an estimate right now. We get a lot of pilot payments in the month of February. So the tax cap is actually due March 1st. So this is an estimated number, and I kept that the same for the projections because I wanted to be relatively conservative. The next is the capital levy from the prior year. And again, it goes from the prior year to the next year, and it flows right through. We have a little bit of an increase in our capital levy for 21-22. That's due to the construction project going on right now and how we're financing that. The allowable levy growth factor from last year was 1.0 1.0181. It's down to 1.0123. So that is a negative impact. It doesn't allow us to levy as much. And then you come to the total levy prior before exclusions. You can see it's a slight increase, about $300,000. You add back in the capital levy for the upcoming school year, and then you get the levy limit. So for the 21-22 school year, or levy limit is $45,734,000. And if you scroll and look down here at the bottom where it has the years again across the top, you'll see the percentages there. The actual levy limit is 3.72%. And again, this will be refined as I get better numbers for the pilots. I estimated if we went just to 2%, our levy would be the $44,974,000. 3.2% might be something that's a little too high for people to swallow in this economic environment. So I put 2% in there. But the board needs to know if we go to 2%, as opposed to going to the cap, we leave $759,000 of tax levy on the table that we never get back. And then it just shows you how that'll compound going forward if we went just to 2% or close to it for those remaining years. Are any questions on the tax cap? I know it's a kind of, crazy calculation. It's confusing.
So I just want to do 2 seconds of clarification before we get to that question scenario with regard to this. I want to clarify that there is a difference. The cap is very different. You hear a 2% cap, but it's based upon a formula that comes down that requires that 2%. And we are still and have continued in this district to remain below that. In order for us to do what they call pierce the tax cap, it has to be, there has to be a supermajority of those eligible to vote based upon the last time a budget was voted upon. So therefore, in order to do that, this board does not vote on the budget. In your town, your village, your state budget, your county budgets, the board that votes is your legislative board, your village board, your town board. So a supermajority, I'll take, for example, a township, usually has 5 people on it. A supermajority is 4 people. They can pierce your tax cap. The school district has to go based on the people who vote for the budget. So those who vote for the budget, we would need approximately, those who are eligible to do it based upon the number and the figures, we would need approximately 7,000 people who would vote to pierce the tax cap. We barely get 3,000 people total to come out and vote for anything. So based upon that information, understand this board continues to come in below the 2% tax cap. Even though you're seeing that 3.7 number, that's below the 2% formula. That is a legit. Okay, so understand this board continues to come in below the 2%. We have done that consistently, and we have remained within what is the legal boundaries of what it is that we can do. Your electric bills go up, your gas bills go up, so do ours, because we're paying those bills for you. So please, please, please understand, we're not piercing your tax cap. We're not. Other municipalities can do that. The school district, could we put it up for a vote? Absolutely. Are there communities that do that? Absolutely. But this board is saying, no, we can live within those means. Those are good adjustments. However, when the governor says, here's what we're going to possibly cut from you, and this is what it means, that's where we have to start to have those conversations. So Mrs. Failla has said it a lot through numbers, but I know we have a lot of ears listening, and I wanted to put it more into layman's terms so that people understood what it was that we were going for. So did I describe that well, Mrs. Failla? Because you've been
Yes,
teaching a long
yes.
time. So thank you. And with that said, are there any questions with regard to this particular screen from the board? Ms. Failla would like to do that now. If not, I'm going to ask Dr. Evans and Ms. Failla to continue on through the end of the presentation and finalize that. So Ms. Jersey.
On the capital levy, is that, at what point does that have the whole entire, the newest bond in it financed? Or that's not part of that?
Yeah, that will be the 22-23 school year where it goes up. If you go down to the exclusion section, that 3.2 million, that's where it's fully funded. Yeah, that's the 50, if we did 54. Yep.
And do we have anything coming off, or is that fully just the new bond?
So we do have a couple of small, about $600,000 of debt coming off. And I believe that comes off in the 21-22 school year. Plus we have the EPC from that we're going to do. So that's going to be added in to these numbers as well. So there's a bunch of different debt service that's in there, but the 22-23 would be all of it. Increases and decreases. That's the top level.
I muted myself. Any other questions from board members? Okay, so
Okay.
continuing on with
And again, those numbers will get refined as we get better and more information on our pilots for the upcoming year. We get payments and they make adjustments all the time. So I will let the board know at the March 4th meeting exactly what the tax cap calculation came out as. So this slide, I took the the first column is the current year budget. And I just want to focus on the surplus deficit line, which is the ones in red on the bottom. So this shows you that the board chose to build a budget that had a deficit of $2.7 million, and we applied fund balance to that. For the 21-22 school year, I did the tax cap calculation. I took the governor's proposal for aid, came up with revenue of $1,000. The rollover budget, like I said, is the $92,186,000. So we're showing a deficit of about $884,000. Not terrible, we'll sharpen our pencils on that rollover, and I'm sure, we can manage $800,000 if we had to apply some fund balance. But the 22-23 school year is where you see this funding cliff. The 22-23 school year shows a reduction in state aid of about 10%. That's that $6.8 million coming off from the federal money that supplanted state aid. And the expenses is, again, I just rolled it forward, making some assumptions about salaries, benefits, and BOCES services, but left everything else the same. And you can see the 22-23 school year that we're looking at a deficit of $10 million. That's, to me, not manageable. And it just gets worse and worse and worse. So if we don't have the state really do the right thing and not use federal money to supplant state aid, we're looking at significant program cuts or something to manage that kind of a number. But I did this slide and I thought it really highlighted the negative impact of the governor's proposal. And that's my last slide.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Failla.
So any questions from the board to Dr. Evan or to Ms. Failla with regard to this? Helen, Ms. Jersey.
So the local line on that is the tax levy.
Yeah, tax levy and other local revenues. Yeah.
So the
It's
state
mostly
is
the
actually the federal, the foundation aid, and the CARES Act money that they're saying.
The state, yes. Mhm.
So they're supplanting state aid with that federal money, and they're calling it state aid. And so that's why it's producing that mirage of state aid going up and it's only an $880,000 budget gap for next year for us. But it's once that goes away, it's a pretty steep cliff after that. And $10 million would be a huge hole to fill that. We'd have to cut programs at that point for sure, if it got to that. The rollover budget, just so everyone's clear, that assumes, a budget of the programs that we're doing this current year or what we planned for this year, which is if everything were open as normal. So a rollover budget would be if everything reopens as normal in September of 21. That's, kind of the rollover budget. So we're not adding programs. We have started our meetings with administrators to discuss what their proposals are for next year. And we're being very mindful of, what's necessary in this type of economic environment. And we were expecting, to be honest, we were expecting worse news on state aid. However, just to have that 1 year federal funding cliff is very problematic.
Ms. Jersey?
And in the forecast, did you forecast the foundation aid remaining the same for how long?
So I found foundation aid, I showed the cliff on the 21 or 22, 23, and then I assumed it would increase by 1%. So I was being a little conservative. So I didn't want to say it would be frozen completely. I thought he'd give us something back, but I wasn't comfortable going more than 1%.
Anyone else? So basically it's taking a look at it this way, if we take money from savings, which, money that was stored, so that's that federal dollar, and we spend it on, bills that we have to pay in our households, we take our savings and we spend it, and there's no additional money the following year to replace that money into savings, you're still in a hole to pay your bills in the household. And that's what this basically is for layman's terms, for people who are looking at those numbers and going, what? That's what that basically is. So we've got some, work to do from this end and some educating to our communities with regard to what a school tax looks like, how it is figured out. And the fact is that the people sitting here, we don't have much control over parts of it. The only thing that we'll be able to do is cut what we give to kids. It's the only place to go because that's where the expenses are that we have control over. There's many unfunded mandates that we have to adhere to that are in the bulk of our budget. So with that said, any further questions from any of the board members? Okay, so then moving on.